Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Return to Learning Student Online Forum. My name is Annika, and both Declan and I are so excited for you all to welcome you all today and share the information and answer student questions regarding the return to school. Okay, thank you. So again, welcome everyone. And before we begin, I'd like to start off with a prayer for the safe return of students, families, and staff to the school. So please join me in praying a quick Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So as we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we here at the Durham Catholic District School Board are on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. So this evening, we hope to provide you all with information regarding our board's most recent plans for the return this September and answer your questions submitted to us through our Instagram and email. The forum will be recorded and posted on the board website as well as our Instagram. We'd also like to note that this forum will take place until 5:30, and we will try to answer as many of the questions that we have prepared this evening. But in the case that we can't, we will be sure to do so through our Instagram at Senate DCDSB. So now we'll do some brief introductions. Hi everyone, my name is Annika. I am from Notre Dame in Ajax. I will be entering the 12th grade this year, and I am one of the board's student trustees.
Hi everyone, my name is Declan Amaral. I'll be a grade 11 student at All Saints this year, and I am the second student trustee. It is now my pleasure to welcome our Director of Education, Tracy, who will introduce members of the board's senior administrative team and provide some remarks. Director?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be able to participate in this student forum today. As mentioned, I am the Director of Education for Durham Catholic District School Board. I'd like to say I'm not just like the director, I also a member. I am a graduate of Durham Catholic District School Board myself, as are my three children. I've been a member of this community for a very long time, and I'm very privileged and honored to be able to be a member of our leadership team here in the board. So today I'd like to introduce you to some of my wonderful colleagues who work with me at the board office. I have a Superintendent Scott Greaves, who is in charge of our Facility Services Department. I have Superintendent Susie Lee Fernandez, who is the Superintendent of Education, who has lots of responsibilities for a variety of portfolios, but some of the major ones are equity, student services, and policy development. We also have Superintendent Michael O'Neill, who is Superintendent of Human Resource Services. Superintendent Mariah O'Reilly, who again is a superintendent of a number of portfolios, but she is in our academic services department, and so she oversees a lot of our programming, K-12 curriculum, and a variety of different areas like Indigenous education, ESL, and French. I'd like to also introduce Superintendent Ryan Putnam. He is our money man. He's our Superintendent of Business, our Chief Financial Officer. Superintendent Jim Wilson, who is our Superintendent of Faith Formation, and he also is our resource to our student trustees in our Student Senate, as well as responsible for continuing education and health and safety. And on the line, I think he's on, actually, I'm not sure if he is, but Superintendent Wynn, yes, he is on the line today. We have Superintendent Wynn is an academic services supervisory officer together with Superintendent O'Reilly. He shares responsibility for programming areas such as co-op and guidance and student success. He also is the superintendent responsible for international education, e-learning, and safe schools. And lastly, but not least, the savior of our day here, our chief information officer, Ronald Rodriguez, is on the line, and he is our producer for this event today. And so a number of our senior admin team is here this afternoon online, and when we get to our question parts, I may ask some of them to weigh in with their expertise from their various areas. Just before I go on to pass it back to you, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to trustees Annika and Declan for their leadership in making this forum possible, for speaking on behalf of our student body. Student voice is very important to us, and one of our strategic plan commitments for the coming years is to increase engagement, and of course student voice is right at the very heart of that. To our student senators, who I think you're going to introduce momentarily, thank you as well for your leadership in your schools and for your combined leadership as a voice for students across the system. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Director. On the topic of student leadership, I would now like to introduce our student senators who will be asking the predetermined questions that were received in advance of today's forum to the director and members of the senior administrative team. From All Saints, we have Gabe Vaughn. From Archbishop Dennis O'Connor, we have Tiana Fernando. From Father Leo J. Austin, we have Lucas DiBiase. From Monsignor John Prima, we have Kira La Fabiana. From Monsignor Paul Dwyer, we have Sinead Allen. And from St. Mary's Catholic, we have Denithi Fernando. Next slide, Mr. Rodriguez, please.
Thank you.
Pass it to
so,
Anna.
Thanks, Declan. So in formulating the return to learning plan for our board, the senior administration were guided by these principles, which really made sure that the plan for learning this September would prioritize safety and well-being for both students and staff in a visibly demonstrated trauma-informed approach, because the board recognizes that it's been so long since we've all been together in the school community, and the quarantine was very impactful to all of our well-beings. So this is why the board is really prioritizing the reestablishment of relationships with students and families and ensuring that all decisions being made are made to provide equitable outcomes for all. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. So a big part of this return to learning platform that we're using, the model, is obviously focusing on the safety and well-being of staff and students. So this first graphic that we have is a visual representation of the hierarchy of controls in regards to COVID-19. This hierarchy was created by the Sick Kids Guidance for Reopening, a document which the Durham Catholic District School Board has been referring to since it came out, in addition to public health experts across the province, country, and the world. Next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. To further this point, experts have recommended that mask wearing be made mandatory for students roughly 10 and up. Therefore, DCDSB students from grade 4 to 12 will have to wear a non-medical or cloth mask, whereas our JK to grade 3 students, while not being made mandatory, will be encouraged to wear a mask of the same level. We also realize that masks may not always feel comfortable and can be bothersome when worn for long periods of time, so we will be building breaks into the day where students can safely take them off. You can go to the next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Similarly, all staff will be required to wear level 1 masks, such as medical face masks and face shields. And that's to ensure safety of students while there's close contact for explanations and instructions in person classes. So as is the case in a lot of restaurants, grocery stores, and other shops in our communities, we'll have signs around the schools and buildings to remind students and staff of the importance of social distancing and proper sanitation practices like hand washing. This slide and the next will be some signs that we may find around our schools. Additionally, high contact surfaces like desks and doors will be receiving enhanced cleaning twice a day and possibly more if needed. In order to ensure this, we've been able to hire more custodial staff for our schools, which will further help in the event of a presumed or diagnosed case of the coronavirus in a staff member or student. you could go to the next slide, thank you very much. Another thing that we're doing to increase safety even more in our schools. Oh, if you could go to the last slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. Another thing that we're doing to increase the safety in our schools is recommending that staff open their windows when possible, and that our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system settings will be adjusted in schools to increase the amount of fresh air in the building. I will pass it on to Annika for the next section.
Thank you. So the next set of slides will cover what face-to-face learning will look like for secondary students. Next slide, please. So earlier this month, a survey was released polling families on which way students will be returning to school, and these are the results so far. Next slide, please. So if you begin the school year in online learning, you will have the opportunity to return to in-class learning. In elementary, you'll be able to switch at natural breaks in the year, like Christmas and March break. And at the secondary level, you will be able to switch at the end of the quadmester. Next slide, please. For our grades 7 to 12 schools, like Monsignor John Prima and the AMP program at All Saints, grade 7s and grade 8s will follow the elementary model, where students attend every day as opposed to the secondary model. Next slide, please. So moving on to the secondary model, this is what in-class learning will look like for secondary students, and feel free to take a picture or a screenshot of this slide if you like. And it is also on the Return to Learning webpage on our board website. So secondary students will be following a quadmester model, meaning that you'll take 2 courses at a time for 4 quarters, totaling to 8 courses or credits by the end of this school year. Students will be divided into 2 cohorts, which simply means 2 groups, and those groups will attend student school on alternating days, so every other day plus every other Friday. For example, let's say you're in cohort 1 and I'm in cohort 2. On Monday, you will go to school for 150 minutes of instructional time learning 1 course, and let's say that it's math. So you'll only be at school for 150 minutes learning 1 subject, and then you go home. And then you can take 90 minutes to go home and grab some lunch before you have online learning sessions. So let's say that your second class this quadmester is English. English is what you'll be learning online for 75 minutes of instructional time, followed by another 75 minutes of academic support time, again for course 2, which in this example is English. So this is where you can email your teachers with any questions you have, and it's kind of like a teacher's office hours per se. So to recap, this day, you would have spent half a day in school learning math in the morning, and in the afternoon learning English at home. And in the meantime, myself, who was in cohort 2 in this example, I'll be staying home for the whole day, but in the afternoon, I'll have 75 minutes of online learning for my second course, which let's say is also English, and 75 minutes of academic support where I can email or ask my teachers questions that I have. So the next day, we pretty much just switch. You stay at home, while I come in the morning and learn math and come home for English online, and you stay at home the whole day but learn English online in the afternoon. So we'll just alternate like this every other day, but on week 2, the courses are switched, meaning that you or I come in school for those 150 minutes in the morning, and it'll be our second course, English, not math. So the schedule and timetable was something that we had many questions about, and we totally understand that this is new and really unfamiliar to everyone right now. But if you have any further questions, again, feel free to ask them near the end or send them to our Instagram. And remember that this is new for everyone, so it might seem intimidating right now, but we're all going to work through it together, so there's no need to stress about that. Next slide, please. So in terms of provincial assessments like EQAO and OSSLT, for grade 3s and 6s, EQAO will be canceled for this academic year. For grade 9s, however, it will still continue, and as you can see, it's divided by the dates for the first semester and second semester students. And in terms of the OSSLT, there will be no assessment available this fall. However, the grade 10s who need to take the OSSLT will take it on April 8th in the spring. Next slide, please. For the students who missed writing the OSSLT due to the COVID cancellations, students will be able to complete it on April 8th as well. And in terms of the community involvement hours, which are the 40 hours that we need to graduate, these are pending further direction from the Ministry of Education, so we currently do not have information, but we'll be sure to update you all once we do get that. Next slide, please. So here's a chart outlining how some of the everyday activities that students undergo will work. Just to sum it up, unfortunately, at this point, field trips and extracurriculars will be canceled because it implies a mixing of cohorts. And we really just want to keep physical distancing and physical interactions to a minimum. And shared equipment will be limited. Assignments will be online as much as possible. And breaks and recesses will be facilitated with strict safety protocols. Next slide, please. So these next slides will just review some school programming for in-person learning. So for example, music, in-person classes will focus on non-vocal and non-wind instruments, instrumental performances, as to reduce the amount of like bacterial particles that are spread. In terms of computer science, where possible, students will utilize their individual Chromebooks as to avoid sharing. Next slide, please. In terms of physical education, detailed industry directions are provided for weight rooms, and classes will take place outdoors when they are possible, and students are instructed to arrive already in their physical education attire so that we would not need change rooms. For science, again, industry-specific guidelines and classroom procedures have been provided for science educators to follow, and they will utilize single-use equipment when applicable, as well as virtual or digital labs when possible. For food studies, classes that teach food preparation are allowed to happen as long as students do not share the food that they prepare with others. In terms of technological education, next slide, please. So for technological education, sector-specific directions are still to be provided, but where possible, student rotations will be designed to allow for common use equipment to be cleaned in between the use. For co-op or cooperative education or other work education, work experience may resume as long as the risk of infection is mitigated by all participants. So when you're on the work placements, you will need to follow industry requirements for the field of study. And again, in-person classes will follow standard cohorting guidelines. Next slide, please. And this is where I'll pass it off to Declan for online learning.
Thanks, Annika. If you could go to the first slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you. So for those students who then opted for online learning, they will be placed into a virtual school with virtual classes for the courses that they're taking. And these classes will consist of students and staff from across the board and will be based off of the full ministry's curriculum, which will include both synchronous and asynchronous work. These students will be required to sign in daily for instruction and given a schedule to work with just as students in person will receive. If you could go to the next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you. So our wonderful principals for this online model of learning will be Mr. Young, principal of our new Durham Catholic Elementary Virtual Learning Center, and Ms. Mellum, principal of our Durham Catholic Secondary Virtual Learning Center. So just a note for everyone watching, I'll take a few minutes to go over these next two graphics since they cover a lot of the questions that Annika and I have received about online learning. So firstly are the programs which will be used for the virtual portions of this year. So as was the case last year, we will continue to use our Office 365 products like Outlook and Teams, as well as the app students and staff should be familiar with already, EDSB. The synchronous part of learning will take place either through Zoom calls or team meetings, which will be set up and then sent to you by your teachers. If you could put the next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. So to close the online portion of this presentation, we were able to put together a sample schedule for a secondary student online. Similar to the in-person model, students' classes will be broken up into 75-minute sessions. However, there will be no quote-unquote off days, as it will be a full week of learning and instruction from teachers, which will be a mix of synchronous and asynchronous classes. The lunch period will also be 60 minutes compared to the 90 minutes for the in-person learning, since traveling from one's kitchen to their study place does not need to be included in the time break. If you could go to the next slide, I believe that's Annika.
Thank you. So these next slides will cover special education. Next slide, please. So students who are working in non-credit bearing courses, and these are also known as K courses, who are supported with one-on-one assistance, will be accommodated to attend every day. So the board actually reached out to the ministry for an exemption in this case, because most secondary students will be attending, or who chose to go on in person, will be attending every other day. However, these students who take K courses will be attending every single day. Next slide, please. So the processes and timelines for the creation of an IEP or an individual education plan will continue as usual, and resource and itinerant staff will be meeting with individual students and consulting with educators to ensure that all transition requirements are met, for example, their hearing services or vision services. And for more information about this, you can visit the board's special education webpage. Next slide, please. So in terms of assessments, this September, the priority will be for students to complete the feedback meetings or any unfinished assessments that were unfinished due to COVID-related cancellations, and referrals for assessments will continue with consideration given to individual student profile and gaps due to remote learning challenges. Next slide, please.
Thanks again, Annika. So if you could go to the next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. In terms of the busing situation for this year, we have been working closely with DSTS as well as the Durham Public School Board, since we do share buses with them. The changes that students will see this year in buses is that they will be required to wear a mask while on the bus, required to adhere to social distancing measures at bus stops, and there will only be 2 students per seat on buses. To find specific bus route information, please check DSTS's 24-hour automated phone line at the number on the screen previous, and keep in mind that you will need the student's OEN number found on your report cards. So some other changes to expect this year in buses is that they will be fully cleaned twice a day and cleaned on high contact surfaces after each bus run. Hand sanitizer will also be provided, however, students are asked to wash their hands before boarding. Next slide, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Declan. So now I'd like to open the question and answer period and call on Tiana to start with the first question for Director Burrell regarding safety and PPE.
Thank you, Annika. The first question that students were asking Director Burrell is what protocols are in place in the case that a student or staff member has symptoms or is diagnosed with COVID-19?
Thank you very much for that question. It is actually very timely because just yesterday, the actual official protocol for managing COVID-19 within our schools was released by the Ministry of Education. So the first thing that I would say is that going back up to the when we were at the beginning of this presentation, Annika and Declan talked about the hierarchy of safety measures that we were putting in place. And so one of the very first most important things is that we really need to make sure that all students and all staff, and indeed anyone who is entering our building, is doing a self-assessment before they come into a school. That self-assessment changes from time to time in terms of being updated according to the most current research about symptoms, but we will have links available, and we will be continuously advertising to our community the symptoms that they should be watching and monitoring themselves for before they enter the building. After they, so presuming that people don't enter our building when they are not feeling well, then, but perhaps they start to feel sick during the time that they are at school, there is now a strict protocol that actually can be found on the Ministry of Education website, and we will be updating our own website with that protocol around the things that we have to do to respond to that. So we will be working very closely with the Public Health Department in Durham region to always be reporting any probable or confirmed cases of COVID-19. The school board's primary responsibility is really to keep track of our attendance and who is in contact with whom. So that is one of the reasons why you're being cohorted into particular classes, because should anyone in any of our classes get sick, we would need to report it to the Public Health Department if we thought it was a probable cause of COVID-19, our case of COVID-19. And then we would be working with the Public Health Department to provide them with comprehensive lists of anyone who would have been in contact, direct contact or indirect contact with that individual within the time period of when the illness might have occurred. And so that's just kind of a start of it. The protocol itself, if you get to look at it, it's about 26 pages long, so there's a lot to it. But in essence, that's the start of it. Of course, as soon as anybody is feeling sick or showing any symptoms, we would bring them to the office, isolate them. We will have personal protective equipment kits in our school, so that we can make sure that anybody who is in contact with that individual that's not feeling well is wearing eye shields and masks and gloves. We'll contact their parents. We'll advise them to please get tested, and we'll contact our public health department to get further advice from them as to what our next steps will be. In terms of any sort of like contacting of other people and advising them of whether or not they need to get tested, all of that would be directed by the Public Health Department, who are experts in that area.
Thank you, Director. Another question that some students had is, how will students with special needs or an IEP be supported?
And so I have our Superintendent of Student Services on the line right now. Superintendent Lee Fernandez, would you be able to speak a little bit about how our students with special needs or an IEP will be supported with regards to like safety and personal protective equipment, etc.?
Sure. Thank you for the question. It's my pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. And maybe part of that would be, starting with 10 minutes a day and practicing the same types of training that would take place for the rest of our student body, how to properly put on a mask, take off a mask, and really building up students' tolerance to having a mask on their face, and those same
you know, one of the things that we are obviously very concerned about in terms of health and safety is reducing the transmission of COVID-19. But when we're putting in protective measures to try to do that, we can also make sure, or we have to make sure that we are also not negatively influencing people with other types of medical conditions, for example, people with fragrance sensitivities and or allergies. So we are going to be looking at the provision of hand sanitizer in any of our classrooms where there's not sinks, and also hand sanitizing stations throughout the school. So we would really be discouraging the bringing of fragranced products to school. And I know, like I like them myself, but you know, some of those little hand sanitizers that you get at Bath and Body or Bed Bath and Beyond, those kinds of things, they smell nice, but they might be not good for other people in the school. So it would be better to stick to using the hand sanitizers that we have. Also, some hand sanitizers, as I understand it, also may have peanut products in them, and that also could be a danger to our students. So we really have to be careful about what we're bringing into the building. Superintendent Grieve, could you just talk about how our hand sanitizers and so on are being provided to us?
I can. Thank you, Director Burrell. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the question. And so we actually got all our orders this week through our Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. And we've been, I was actually down there today going through it, sorting and figuring out how we're going to actually have it available to the students and staff within the school. It is a scent-free product. It's 65% alcohol base, which meets the public health minimum standard. They're asking for 60, so we're at 65%. And what we're looking at is having various stations, pumps in the main kind of common areas, and then in many of the classrooms there will be the availability. It'll be a spray bottle because it's a very liquid type solution. It's not the gel that a lot of people are used to. The gel is actually it's very difficult to get. So it's a very liquid based, and that'll be used through a spray bottle, which will sort of atomize it, so it'll come out, and then it'll be used, you know, whoever's using it in the school will use those spray bottles. We're getting a distinctive spray bottle that will be, everyone will know that's the hand sanitizer bottles to be used within the school. And yeah, again, there's no fragrances associated with that. So I don't know if there's any other comments I can add in terms of the hand sanitizer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Burrell and Superintendent Grieve. My final question is, will the learning model change depending on the severity of COVID-19? Should it improve or worsen? For example, in the case of a positive situation, will all students return to a full-time in-class learning? Or in the case of a negative situation, would all students return to a fully online model?
That's a really good question, and I thank you for that. So one of the most important things about any sort of return to learning plan is looking at the current state of affairs within our region. And so in Durham region, we are a designated board, and that means that when they were deciding upon reopening, our numbers around COVID transmission in the area, they were good, but they weren't at the levels that they wanted for us to be able to move into like a full conventional return to school. And so that's why our students are going to continue to be cohorted right now on an every other day schedule and only have approximately 15 in each of your classes. But as you have noted, if the situation improves, then we would be advised by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health that perhaps we could move to more of a conventional model where our students would come every day. You know, that would increase the amount of in-class learning. And then if things, hopefully not, but if things got worse, then yes, we need to be able to pivot right away or in quick order to a fully online model. And so the only other thing that I would mention about that is, as you know, those people, especially who are not in grade 9, but in grade 10, 11, or 12, know we have typically run on a semestered model in Durham Catholic for a very long time. Because of the situation that we're in right now, we've had to move to a quadmestered model. So the thing that I would like to say is, even if we were told that we could go back to a conventional model, the quadmestering would still stay, because we can't really start in like a quadmester model and then move into a semestered model. Our timetabling and everything would have to change if we were doing that. And lastly, there is a possibility that the amount of in-class time might increase, but to do that would mean that we would have to also change all of our bus routes and so on. So there's a variety of different kind of levels of return to normal that we might have to contend with, but that'll all be dependent upon what the situation is in our region as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Tiana, for your questions, and thank you so much to the senior admin who answered. Before I pass it on to Lucas for the questions about in-person learning, I actually had a question of my own that I hadn't written down, but I was just brought to my attention by a senator. How will we be prepared to store hand sanitizer properly in such large quantities? And what will happen with drills like fire drills and shelter in place, as those are still mandatory?
That is also a very good question. So I'm going to ask Superintendent Grieve once again if he could respond to that. So how are we storing all those large quantities and fire drills and the other types of safety drills that we do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So our hand sanitizer, we're actually getting it delivered each month. So it's not going to be that we have months and months of stockpile, and we're delivering what's needed for the school for that month. It will get stored in our custodial storage rooms, where we have other chemical that does get stored in the schools, and that's in a lot of our schools we have sprinklered systems. We are working with our local fire departments as well. They're aware of this increase in the hand sanitizer going into schools, and we are also working with those fire departments on the fire drills, so the protocol. So the expectation is that fire drills will continue to happen. But the expectation is that they understand there'll be a distancing component, and in the secondary schools, because everybody will be wearing masks, that they should be able to run a fire drill as normal. And the Ontario Fire Marshal is also coming out with additional guidelines that they're working on with the ministry to help facilitate those types of drills.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Superintendent, and to Senator Vaughn for bringing that question to my attention so last minute. I'm sorry. I'd like to pass on the questions now to Senator Lucas, who will be addressing the in-person versions of our questions.
Thank you, Declan. All right, my first question for you, Director, is, will Picture Day still take place, and will students be issued student ID cards?
So thank you for that question. So this is one of those areas, and there may be a few questions today that we don't have a complete answer on at this point in time. And so one of the things that we are being very aware of, and that is part of our layers of protection, is minimizing the number of visitors to our school. And so our schools, we're going to try to retain our school buildings primarily just for our students and our staff, and have very limited visitors to the school, because every person that comes in and out of the school who is not a student or staff member will have to be signed in, and we will need them to complete a self-assessment before they come in, and we'll need to make sure that we take down all of their information should there be any sort of outbreak or any kind of contact tracing that needs to happen. We need to have all of that on record. And so for people like our photographers who work with us, that's another visitor into the school. We would, if we were going to proceed with school photos, we would have to work with the provider, the photographers around that, but also with our public health department to determine whether or not we could put into place a process of doing that would be safe, and would meet all of our public health guidelines. And so that's something that we are thinking about. But again, just like all of our other processes, students may recall when you came in the springtime to pick up your items that might have been left in your lockers. Each time we go through something new like that, we have to develop a protocol. We have to send that protocol to their local public health department, have them review it and tell us whether or not it's doable, and give us any advice on how we can make it safer. And so my answer around your photos is that we don't know that for sure yet, because we need the advice of our public health department on that. Now, normally it is our photographers who also produce our student ID cards. So if for some reason that's not possible in a safe way, we do have photos on file that we might be able to produce some sort of alternate around the student ID card. And if there were students who were new to our school, we would figure out a way that they would be able to send us a photo of themselves that we could use to facilitate that.
Okay, thank you, Director. Secondly and lastly, how will exams be administered for students in class learning?
Thanks for that. I'm going to ask Superintendent O'Reilly if she might be able to talk about assessment and evaluation a little bit. Is she on there? If she's on there.
Hi there. I am here. Hello, everyone. Great question. For the most part, exams will, final exams will, at this point, as far as we know, follow as you are accustomed to having them in your in-class classes. We, Superintendent Wynne is also, who is working on the virtual school, and I are working together to align these so that they mirror each other, so that what is happening in the secondary virtual school is very similar to what's happening as far as exams on the in the face-to-face school. We are finalizing dates around quadmester and the assessments and exams around that. We are looking for final direction from the Ministry of Education, and we'll update the website with more details as soon as we have them.
Thank you, Superintendent Lee Fernandez. Now I'll pass it off to Sinead for e-learning related questions.
Okay, so the first question I have is, will students enrolled in online classes still have exams?
And so I am probably going to turn most of these e-learning questions over to Superintendent Wynne, because I believe that he is online right now. Are you there, Superintendent Wynne?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Director. In regards to the question, will students who register in the online school will have exams? As Superintendent O'Reilly previously alluded to, we're looking for consistency between online learning and in-person learning as well. So as things unravel, we'll make sure there's consistency between the two. So whether a student chooses to register in-person learning or online learning, it will be consistent. So right now we are looking at exams, and if there are no exams, that will be consistent across. We'll try to align that. We are waiting for more direction from the ministry. And so as a student, you might be wondering, if there's no exam, what does that look like? So teachers will then adapt their assessment, and they'll look at putting greater emphasis on the culminating, the CAT activity, and making that worth more than perhaps a breakdown of an exam, which might be 15% and a CAT 15%, maybe a greater emphasis on 30. But once again, once we have more information, we'll share that with you, and we'll look for alignment between in-person learning and on the online virtual school. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, how and when will online students get their timetable of courses?
I could probably answer that one. So I want to explain to students that something that's been very challenging for us as a board right now is we only got approval for our final approval for our schedules. I think it was last week, beginning of last week, and what we had to do from there, we also had to gather all of that data of who was going to be in class and who was going to be kind of moving into our online virtual schools. So that was all good, but that we asked people to respond to that by August 12th. Of course, there were always some people that don't respond, so it took us another 4 or 5 days to follow up with about 2,500 people to get their responses to that. Our next step in that process is then we have to kind of move our staff around, because we have about 4,000 students between elementary and secondary who are choosing online learning right now. And so when you take 4,000 students out of a school and put them into an online school, that means we have to shift our staff as well. Shifting staff means that we have to look at all of our timetables over again, our schedules, and then we have to create a new timetable for the whole e-learning for the online learning school. And so I can tell you that staff in our human resources department and all of our principals and our guidance teachers and so on, who usually are responsible for all of that scheduling and organization, they are working overtime trying to get these items organized, and we're working as a board to try to get our teachers into the places where we need them to be. It is our hope and intention that students will receive their timetables within, like, the school starts is usually scheduled for September 8th, so we are hoping to be able to communicate out those timetables electronically September 8th, September 9th in that area for our online kids.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, in what ways will online learning in September differ from the online learning earlier this spring and summer?
And so maybe we'll go back to Superintendent Wynne to speak about that briefly.
Thank you, Director. If you think back, students, to what online learning looked like back in March or June, just to kind of go back to then, probably you were in a class with students from your school, and the transition was in-person learning January, February, March with the same teacher, and you belonged to that cohort. And perhaps it may have looked very differently from class to class in terms of the connection, in terms of some classes may have had the synchronous online version, and sometimes it may have been check-ins and phone calls and emails. But the model will look very different in terms of September. So if you have registered for the online virtual school, you will have students in your classes from across our system, and teachers from across the system as well will be teaching your courses, and you will have different principals. So as previously mentioned, we have appointed a principal of our Catholic secondary school and also a principal of our elementary virtual school. And in terms of what to expect in terms of the day, so I think the timetable was showed previously, and the government has mandated with the Ministry of Education, PPM 164, outlining that there should be synchronous learning for 3 of the blocks. So if you have a class in the morning, that will be synchronous, and that will involve online, so an expectation that you're online with your teacher, but it could look very different from class to class and from teacher to teacher based on the curriculum. You know, some parts of the curriculum will need adaptations to suit that online learning environment. And as well, in terms of format, things you might expect, you could have check-ins at the beginning of the day, some large group discussions, maybe some small group discussions, a number of things depending on the course, depending on the discipline, whether it's elementary or secondary. Things like nutrition breaks will be built in, and time for you to take a physical activity outside just to get some fresh air. We'll have breaks for as well. Anytime you need to check in with your teacher if you have concerns or things like that, and breakout rooms, and there could be discussion posts or where the teacher's asking you perhaps to work collaboratively on assignments. And so the teacher might be supervising you in the online environment, and students could be working on an assignment in groups or in pairs while you're being monitored. And things like asking you to complete discussion posts. So there will be a greater emphasis on the synchronous component for 3 blocks of the day. And the other key thing to keep in mind is you'll have students in your class from across the system. That will be different as well. And then your teachers, They could be teachers that are from different secondary schools or elementary schools and a different administrator.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. For time's sake, we're going to cut these questions down a lot in length, so we're going to try and get every senator to ask one question from their topic, just because we still have some closing remarks to get through. So I'll pass this off to Gabe now for his questions about courses.
Thank you, Declan. My question for Director Brill today is, will French immersion students be continuing studies in French, and will French immersion courses be available for students who choose to do online learning?
Thank you for that. Just before I answer that, I would also just say any questions that we aren't able to answer during this time online, we'll take and we'll try to do an FAQ for that and post it and share it with the Student Senate so that people's questions do get answered. So in terms of our secondary French immersion students, you've invested a lot of time and energy in getting through our French immersion program, and we would like to continue to be able to support you doing that. And so those students who are in class, like are at their school and continuing on in face-to-face learning, we will continue to provide the courses in French as part of the quadmestering timetable. So students who are in French immersion, not all of their courses are in French, and so depending upon how their timetable is set up, they might have a French in their first quad, or maybe not till their second or third or fourth. It depends again on what their timetable looks like for the year, but it would be our intention to try to continue to provide those courses. In terms of French immersion courses being available online, again, we are going to do our best to try to provide a full matrix of courses for students based on their programming need. And we haven't completed that matrix of courses for the online school yet, but that is our hope, that yes, we will be able to continue to do that.
Thank you so much, Director. Oh, go ahead, Annika.
Okay, now we'll move on to Kira for her graduation-related question.
Hi, so the question we have is, what will graduation look like for grade 12 this year?
So this is perhaps one of the most difficult ones for me to answer. First of all, I want to talk about our graduates from last year, who under the circumstances really did not get to celebrate their school year in the way that I'm sure that they had looked forward to and had imagined they were going to be able to. Back in June, we were very hopeful about what the fall might look like, and I know that each of our schools had gone to the extent of like booking in dates to be able to do graduation celebrations for last year's graduates this fall. At this point in time, the health restrictions in the province of Ontario are still limiting indoor gatherings to 50 people, and so that kind of a graduation service for all of our students who didn't have their graduations in June and is not going to be possible right now in the fall. With regards to our students who are currently in grade 12, I think that just as we have done in the past, we are going to try our best to plan for things to be the best possible scenario. And if that best possible scenario is that by the end of the year this year that those restrictions that we have on gatherings have been lifted and we're able to celebrate graduation, we will move forward with that. But at this point in time, because I'm not able to predict the future at the moment, I'm not able to really say with certainty what that will look like in the spring and the summer. I can promise you that for our kids who graduated last year and for our kids that are going to graduate this year, we will try to work with our student body and with our families to come up with a way of appropriately recognizing the tremendous achievement of completing secondary school in one way or another.
Great. If we could have Senator Denithi do our closing question, and then we can go to the closing remarks.
Thank you. So for the final question, it's, will it be considered an absent if students stay home because they believe they may be sick? In general, how will absences and attendances be handled this year for both in-person and online students?
A couple of things. I think that one of the benefits of the hybrid model that we're currently working in is that even if students have to stay home for a period of time and maybe they miss that face-to-face session, because of the way that the instruction is spread out and mixed between online and in class and some independent work and so on, I think that the effects of having to potentially stay home might not be as great. The other thing is that certainly our teachers, because they will be working back and forth between a face-to-face and an online model, will be making use of those tools like ETSB and Microsoft Office Teams and so on in terms of keeping students up to date on what assignments are. And sometimes, as you said, we don't want people to come to school if they're not feeling well. And so in those cases, they probably should stay home, or they absolutely should stay home, but hopefully they will be able to, if they're not dreadfully sick, still be able to continue up with the online portions of their day. Now, from a tracking perspective, the absence reporting from the in-class piece is going to be important for us, not as any sort of negative mark on a student's attendance records, but so that we actually know with reliability who's been in the school on what days. And so those will probably be tracked as absences so that we can make sure that we are giving the public health department accurate records if ever we are called upon to do so. And so that's kind of some of the information that I would say about attendance reporting. One of the things that we will really do during that first week from September 8th to 11th, and even moving into the second week as we're going back, we're going to provide our students through the schools with very specific information around those kinds of expectations and what this year is going to look like. We know that this is a year like no other, and that we need to take the time to make sure that all of our students and our families understand what the expectations are and how to do things, because we all want to stay safe, and at the same time we want to return to ensuring that all of our students are the beneficiaries of some robust learning, whether they're choosing online or in class.
Thank you so much, Director. Thank you very much to our amazing student senators, our senior administrative team, and to everyone watching. For more information or questions about the school year, please feel free to check our Senate Instagram at SenateDCDSB and our email senatedcdsb@gmail.com. Annika?
So now we'll pass it off to, or we'll actually share the video that we just wanted to share with everyone so that we can give you all a little bit of a preview of what school will look like come September. So Superintendent Rodriguez, would you mind sharing the video, please? Okay, So thank you, and thank you everyone. We wanted to join you for joining us this afternoon. We hope that the forum has helped ease some of your concerns regarding the return to learning, and we thank you all for your continued patience during these unprecedented times. If you have any additional questions in the coming weeks, we invite you to reach out to our Student Senate, and we recognize that there was a few questions that we were unable to answer today, and we will be sure to post those on our Instagram. You can also reach us on our Instagram through DM or by answering the polls on our stories at Senate DCDSB and via email at senatedcdsb@gmail.com. So once again, thank you everyone, and we hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much, everyone.